So it's based on Bosch. And that's also, I would say that's the biggest differentiator. Of course, there are different components that are going to be involved. A small advantage, especially for quite some time, was the support for multiple availability zones, which wasn't part and available in Tanzu, vSphere with Tanzu. But the biggest differentiator is the architecture and what we are using there. Then we've got, yeah? That's one, it's not, I believe. From the licensing perspective, you've got the vSphere supervisor. So the TKGs or TKGs. Yeah. Yeah, TKGi is a separate thing, I believe. Yeah. Robert, do you know it? Is it? Separate. Yeah, that's what I thought. The integrated is separate, yes. Thank you. Then we've got two solutions which are very close to each other. There are just minor differences, and I believe only one of them will stay for a long run, because if you look deeper, there is a huge overlap. So on the one side, we've got this Tanzu Kubernetes grid, which now is vSphere supervisor, where we use the native service provided by vCenter once enabled to provision Kubernetes services, Kubernetes workload clusters. So obviously, there were some changes. So now it also does support multiple zones. It does depend on the storage policies, which is actually not a big deal because in Kubernetes, we use the same concept, so not a big deal. It provides you ability to deploy it. So obviously, the first option, vSphere and the longest path, that's highly coupled with vSphere. So you cannot run it on another infrastructure, another hypervisor, another or public cloud. Yeah, so it's even based on the name, vSphere supervisor, not other supervisor. It does have a couple of options for the load balancing. It can work with VDS, distributed switch, as well as NSX networking. So here we've got flexibility, we can say. Some dependencies, and it also provides the capability of running vSphere pods, which I will discuss in a second. Other than that, we've got the Tanzu Kubernetes Grid Management Cluster, which from the implementation and operation perspective is very similar. The main difference is that with the TKG, so this is the multi-cloud, we've got a separate management cluster. In the first option, it's part of the vSphere cluster. But we still need those components. We still need the control plane that's going to provide the functionality, the Kube API server, and everything we need. And there was a time that the biggest differentiator and use case for the TKG with management cluster was vSphere 6.7. Because that option was introduced along with vSphere 7. So if you had an environment, an infrastructure that was based on vSphere 6.7, you didn't update it yet, that was the only option to use the management cluster. But obviously, even on the VMware slide, they do not mention vSphere 6.7, and I hope, is anyone using vSphere 6.7? Hope not anymore, yeah? So it's not an advantage anymore, but it was for some time. It does support public clouds, but just pay attention, those are the VMware-based clouds. So VMware Cloud on AWS and Azure VMware Solution. So still the VMware stack behind it. You cannot have both in the same cluster, so you cannot have vSphere supervisor and the management TKG with the management cluster. It also has a couple of options for the load balancing, not exactly the same one. So for example, in both of them, we've got either HA proxy or Kube VIP. If you call the Kube VIP a load balancer, that's the free option. So something that you can use for, in a cost-effective way. Plus, it does support Windows workload clusters or Windows worker nodes. So just to summarize those terms, we've got vSphere supervisor, which used to be vSphere with Tanzu. That's the Kubernetes style of implementing things in vSphere, including Kubernetes clusters, because we can deploy Kubernetes clusters, but not only Kubernetes cluster. Again, VM services and few other features. But we can, and this is meant to provide the desired state. So you can define, I want this number of nodes, and there is a controller which is going to keep track of it, making sure you've got this number of controllers. There is vSphere Kubernetes service, and I've seen on some of the other communication that this vSphere Kubernetes service or the vSphere Kubernetes even is used more on the technical presentations, but that's like two different terms. So the vSphere Kubernetes service is the TKGs in the past. So the service that was providing the Kubernetes deployment and management inside a vSphere cluster. Then we've got vSphere Kubernetes, which is the distribution that VMware is using to deploy those Kubernetes clusters. We've got, sorry, vSphere Kubernetes release, that's the distribution. vSphere Kubernetes is the workload cluster. You can provision as many as you need. And there are also two interesting objects called vSphere namespace, which I've seen another name from Robert, how it was? How did you describe it? The plus, yeah. So that would work also with the old VMware products, but that's basically, I call it enhanced resource pool. Because same like the resource pool, it allows you to define the resources, CPU, memory, storage in terms of the storage policies, but also permissions. So we can define who's got access to this namespace and what they can do. Apart from that, we've got vSphere pods, which is the equivalent of a Kubernetes pod running directly on a ASXi server, ASXi host. Obviously not on an ordinary ASXi host. This must be an ASXi host which was prepared for that. Same like with NSX or any other services, they must be onboarded. So as part of this preparation process, there are appropriate modules added. And it looks like the vSphere pods is running directly on the hypervisor, but in reality, this vSphere pods is wrapped into a kind of very tiny virtual machine, which means for the VI admin, we are getting the visibility because we are going to see those pods in our inventory. So if I go, yeah. So if you look at the vCenter inventory, we've got some vSphere pods that we can, as a VI admin, I can track them. Obviously, I'm not going to create them as a VI admin. That's not my role usually, but we can see them. So here you can see the vSphere pods. You can see an example of the workload cluster. So this is also the namespace object. It's going to be visible in the VI or in the vCenter inventory. And as Mark took some of my time, we don't have too much time, but just briefly, as it was also about the Tanzu, in the Tanzu division, there are multiple products that have Tanzu in the name. They are also undergoing a heavy transition probably, because there used to be many of them. And in the past, I would say everything that has Tanzu in the name has something to do with containers. It's probably still the case. But currently, we've got, I would say, three main streams, which is Tanzu Platform, Tanzu Data, and Tanzu Labs. Behind Tanzu Platform that was announced a couple of months ago in US, during the Explore in US, we've got like two options. We can run Tanzu Platform based on Cloud Foundry, which is the old Tanzu application services, and we can run Tanzu Platform based on Kubernetes, which is the Tanzu application platform, so TAS and TAP. Other than that, there are multiple other products like Tanzu Application Catalog, and the Tanzu Data, which is also part of it, Tanzu Labs, which is more like a service, kind of, I would say, professional services offering, which helps you transition your applications, traditional applications, to microservices. So because I don't have much time, but if you are interested in those other Tanzu products, I've seen a lot of guys in the VMware or VMware by Broadcom booths, and they are happy to probably provide more information, including myself. And there is, for those of you who attended and are collecting the rewards, the tokens, there is a bonus slide, surprise session, where you can, I think you need to scan that QR code. That's going to unlock something in your application, and you will get the token for that. So if you want to take a picture, feel free. I don't know where else you can find it, but that might be the only opportunity. And other than that, that's it from my side. So I guess someone is already waiting for the next session. So thank you very much.